This is a notice for all participants. This is a public meeting and proceedings are being webcast live online. A recording will also be available for playback on the Council's website shortly afterwards. Please note that your name will appear in the live stream and in the recording. Should you not wish for your image to appear on these, please turn your camera off. Third parties should not record or film the local plan hearings, and neither the Council nor the Planning Inspectorate are liable for any third-party recordings. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's 9:30, so it's time for me to resume the hearing sessions as part of the examination of the Tunbridge Wells local plan. Just tested my microphone and camera before the meeting started with Charlotte, the programme officer, so hopefully everybody can see and hear me. Welcome back for those of you who have attended on previous days, and welcome along for anybody who hasn't yet attended any of the hearing sessions. My name is Matthew Birkinshaw, Chartered Town Planner and the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination. On the call today is Charlotte Glancy, who's the Programme Officer. No doubt you'll have been in liaising with Charlotte with regard to attending today's session. So I'll just very quickly ask Charlotte to put her camera and microphone on just to say hello so everyone knows who Charlotte is. So Charlotte is the Programme Officer for the examination. So if anybody has any questions or queries regarding documents, links for meetings or attending sessions or anything to do with the programme or the examination, the administrative side of the examination, please do speak with Charlotte. Charlotte, for yourself, any matters arising? All participants managed to log on okay?
Yes, everybody's here.
Yeah, everybody's here. Thank you very much. I notice there are a couple of new names around on the participants list and around the virtual table. So I will very quickly go to do some housekeeping matters, and I appreciate that most people have heard this several times by now, but appreciate that that there are some people who maybe haven't participated before. So the meeting today will also be held on Zoom, and the guidance has been circulated already, but we'll very quickly just talk you through how it works. So I'll have my camera and microphone on at all times, and I'd ask that the council sort of main lead witness in answering questions does the same. If participants can then keep their cameras and microphones turned off, and if you wish to speak at any point, if you can use the raise hand function. So you might have this in different places depending on which version of Zoom you're using, but I've got mine at the bottom under the reactions tab. If I want to speak, I can use the raise hand function like that, and I can lower it as well. So if you do wish to speak, if you can raise your hand, and then I know that you wish to participate in the discussion, at that stage, I'll bring you into the discussion. And if it's the first time that you've spoken this morning, if you could introduce yourself to the hearing, let me know who you are. If you're acting on behalf of a particular client or landowner, or if you're a local resident, that would be much appreciated. In terms of today's sites, obviously we're here to discuss the Pembury sites today. There's no agenda as such, but what we'll do is we'll work through the matters, issues and questions which have previously been set out. And I know that people have made hearing statements in response to those. So we'll work through the matters, issues and questions. It may be that we go through some questions in more detail than others. There could be some repetition, especially around some of the questions about how the council's have chosen sites, I know in particular. But what I would just say is the hearings are an opportunity to allow participants to put their points across. It is an opportunity for you to put your points forward. So please do so. And likewise, if you think, well, the inspector's gone over a question there that I want to speak about, or hasn't asked a particular question or hasn't raised a particular issue, again, please let me know, raise your hand if you've made representations on that point, and this is an opportunity to put those points forward. What I would just say is I do actively encourage, obviously, discussion and debate during the hearings. That's what they're for, to test the evidence. But I would just say that please do stick to the points that you've made in your representations. So more than happy for you to engage in the discussion, but please do stick to the points that you've made in your original representations. And also with regard to sites, again, if you want to talk about a particular site, then please do stick to the sites that you've previously made representations on. So that's a really quick sort of summary and run through of the hearings. I'm mindful that the vast majority of people have attended a number of these sessions now, so clearly know how it works. But for those of you who haven't, in summary, really, please do engage in the process and put your points forward. If you wish to speak, use the raise hand function. I then know you're going to speak, and then you can turn your camera and microphone on and engage in the discussion. Before we get going, any housekeeping matters or matters arising from the council?
No, sir, not this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the way that this session is scheduled, it's down for all day. I don't envisage that we'll need all day. We may even get done this morning, but again, we'll sort of take comfort breaks as and when required. If we do need to sort of come back after lunch, I know that there was a separate invite circulated, but it may be that we just keep on this call because everyone's here already, and then we can just turn cameras and microphones off. So when we do break, again, don't leave the meeting, don't leave the Zoom meeting. Just put your camera and microphone onto mute. And then we'll adjourn and take comfort breaks and tea and coffee breaks as we go through, and then we can just turn cameras and microphones back on. And if at any stage anyone does have any problems with the technology, fingers crossed it has been working quite well, but if anybody does have problems with the technology, again, please let Charlotte know outside of the hearing, and we can always adjourn and take a break and allow people to sort of reboot computers and laptops and things like that. Okay, then we'll get going then. Let's say we'll take the Pembury sites in order, and I think certainly with PE1, PE2, and probably PE3 as well. I asked questions about how the areas of residential development have been established and what the justification was for the proposed greenbelt boundary in this location, and it might be in explaining that and answering that question for PE1. That it's the same for the other sites, and obviously that they're closely related, and in the matters, issues and questions, I'd put a point about avoiding repetition. So really the questions around allocation PE1, which is land rear of High Street, but it's the same principle really, because obviously these sites are adjacent to one another. So for these sites to the south of Pembury, then what was the area of residential development based on, and the greenbelt boundary also?
Okay, thank you. So I'm Ellen Gilbert. I'm one of the principal planning officers for the council. So in the council's response to this question, so the question about the residential area and likewise the question on the greenbelt boundaries, we have provided combined responses. So looking first at question 1, which deals with the proposed area of residential development, this is dealt with on pages 8 to 10 of the council's hearing statement. So there are a number of factors which have informed the residential area indicated in the plan. So we looked at obviously the site constraints. So with the aid of GIS information, all the sites have been assessed with the benefit of site visits, including with specialist officers as necessary. We have the suite of evidence-based documents, but in particular, the landscape sensitivity studies, which for these sites indicated a lower sensitivity compared to other areas around the settlement of Pembury. And then likewise, the Greenbelt study work that's been done. So in particular, the Greenbelt study stage 2, which indicated that the sites were appropriate for release from the Greenbelt. And then obviously that was checked through the Greenbelt study stage 3, which then looked at mitigation measures which have been incorporated into the wording of the sites. So this work, particularly for the stage 2, informed the policies as set out in the draft local plan, and after which we obviously considered the reps received to the consultation. And then after the Reg 18 consultation, as the response sets out, we undertook further work in respect of the High Weald Aomb, and individual LVIAs were carried out.
Sorry, can I just stop you there? I think there's an echo. I think your colleague may have their microphone on.
Yeah, okay. So
Yeah,
we had LVIAs which have informed the areas of residential development as well. And they picked up on the fact that the northern areas of the sites in particular which had more of a relationship with the settlement boundary, were less sensitive than the elements of the sites further to the south, where we are proposing significant landscape buffers. So, and as a result of that work, the site capacities were actually reduced in order to protect the landscape features. So in terms of the Greenbelt boundaries, we do consider that they accord with the NPPF requirements for development, the boundaries to be defensible and based on physical features likely to be permanent. And you'll see that the Greenbelt boundaries in this instance take account of the A21 setback, and we've also got the buffer there to help mitigate noise and provide strong landscape features. And the linear nature of the sites has also been a consideration. And then likewise for the site P3, topography was a factor in that as well, and also taking account of potential access points. So that was that. And in terms of the Greenbelt element, if I can just pick up on that a bit further. So the council's response to question 2 deals with that matter. And for P1, the new outer boundary of the Greenbelt follows the top of the embankment and the existing tree line of the A21, and then the existing field and development boundaries. For P2, the new outer boundary follows an existing hedgerow to the cemetery and proposed cemetery expansion, and then follows the top of the embankment and existing tree line for the A21, and then likewise for PE3. So that's a brief summary. I would invite if Mr. Scully wishes to add anything to what I've said. Okay.
So for some reason I can't turn on my video, but I hope you'll accept me just speaking. We have met before. Obviously, I'm David Scully. I'm the landscape officer. The other constraint that's been set out within the proposed developments is this 40-meter buffer across P1 to P3. And there's some good, that doesn't form the Greenbelt boundary, as Ms. Gilbert has explained. That goes to the existing physical feature on the ground in accordance with the MPPF 143F. But the 40-meter buffer is needed for a number of reasons. That the A21, the edge with the A21 along the southern part of these sites is on the higher ground, and the LVA identify potential views from the south, and by providing this buffer that will mitigate against those views. In addition, it provides a continuous and strong green infrastructure element to provide a backdrop to these settlements, because it is on the high ground, when viewed from the north. It also helps with noise attenuation, and to be effective, you have to be really looking at something of the order of 40 meters. So that has been an additional constraint, but that's been factored into the work in terms of capacity and the discussions with the developers.
So as far as the two issues concerned, then, so greenbelt boundary goes to essentially the road, pretty much, I think, along certainly P2, P3, P1, but then within the allocations you've got this setback. For PE1, I'm just looking at the policies map extracts for Pembury. And you may be able to answer this. For PE1, the red line that's shown on the policies map, so it comes down, you've got PE6, and it follows, the red line follows it down, and then it steps in, and sort of, this is the landscape buffer. So on the policies map, what's the thick red line? Is that the limits to built development, or is that the allocation site boundary?
The red line is the allocation boundary.
So for PE1 then, that area of landscaping, that's intended to be outside the allocation then, is it? No.
So the as with other plans, I'm looking at PE1 now, which is map 64. We have the sort of mustard colour, which is the area proposed for built development. We have some light green areas, which are areas to be retained as open space, and in particular against the sort of southern boundary there, you have the 40-metre buffer. And then in the southeast corner, you have an area of hatched, because that's a tree protection order, and that's a group of trees which are going to be incorporated into the development, because it provides access in terms of a east-west cycle pedestrian link, and connects with the existing footpath, which is on the east side there.
Yeah, if you look on the, so that, I agree. So inset map 64 within the local plan is clear, but then when you look at the policies map extract for Pembury, the inset map Pembury, which is 29. Okay,
I have to bear with me. I call that up.
I just want to check, because it may be that the red line, there's a red line and a blue line, and again, there's, I think, the keys on the main map. Just want to make sure that that the boundaries are drawn correctly then. So for PE1, the red line sort of, it steps in from the road, and then it seems to exclude the area of planting.
Inset map Pembury. Right, so I have the inset map. So the limits to build, the red line on the inset map is, I believe, the limits to built development.
Right, okay. And then sitting behind it, I think there's a blue line. So presumably that thick blue line is the allocation site boundary then, is it?
Yes, I think
it is, yes.
Yes.
Right,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
So
okay.
apologies. Yes, the colour coordination could have been a little bit clearer, but yeah.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to check that. And so in terms of the site allocation boundary, so you've got the area where there's the TPO, the Trees Preservation Order, and that area then, so that sort of wooded area, that's to remain in the greenbelt. Is that correct?
No, it's not. The greenbelt Oh, it is. Oh, sorry. I beg your pardon.
Yes,
Ellen, do
again,
you want to answer that one? Yeah. Sorry.
I'll come back on that point. So the southeast corner of the site, so where you've got the TPO, the green belt wraps around that. So if we just look at the site allocation, and then you've got the limits to built development, which is the red line, it goes across and it sort of wraps around that area of woodland. And at that point, the green belt boundary follows that same line. So it's having that physical feature on the ground with the green belt boundary wrapping around it.
what's the reason for that then? Obviously, you've set the you've taken these sites out of the green belt, and you've said that we're going to use essentially the A21 as the sort of southern boundary. It's a clearly defined, defensible, permanent feature. But then it seems, obviously, where you've got this area of woodland, it steps in and would follow the sort of the back edge of PE1 and then the back edge of existing housing. So you'd have this sort of space of green belt between the A21 and Pembury. What do you think that's appropriate? Do you think that's justified? Is that clearly defined?
So if you look at if you go back to the inset map for Pembury, and you look at the relationship between PE1 and PE2, you'll see between them there is areas of open space which is appropriate in the green belt, such as the cemetery, the cricket pitch, a couple of fields that abut the A21, and then in PE1 the block of woodland. So it's not just being inset for the small block of woodland, but there is a strong boundary there to development that and that sort of green wedge, if you like, between PE1 and PE2 is appropriate to include within the green belt, or for it to remain within the green belt. It doesn't appear that there's the justification there to remove it from the green belt. In essence, because there's no development that proposed which is inappropriate.
And so if I can just clarify that point, it is set out in the submission local plan at paragraph 5.665.
Okay, yeah. So PE1, PE2, and PE3 are all very similar in this regard in terms of boundaries, the way in which the site allocations have been drawn, this landscape buffer which you've heard about, this area of woodland, and the reason for that, and the reason why the residential development areas have been established. So what the questions 1 and 2 were really about the boundaries and the areas and the green belt boundaries, and question 3, which again applies to all 3 of these sites and potentially others as well, is whether or not the exceptional circumstances exist, at a site-specific level. As we've talked about the strategic matters around housing needs, spatial distribution, etc. But just for sort of PE1, we might as well take PE1, 2, and 3 then. So at a site-specific level then, what factors did you take into account to reach the conclusion that the exceptional circumstances existed to remove these sites from the green belt? Okay,
if I take that, and then Mr. Scully can add to if he feels necessary. So there are a combination of factors really. The first of which has obviously been the green belt assessment work, and in particular the findings of the Greenbelt Study Stage 2, and then obviously supported by the further work done in the Stage 3 assessment, which showed that for all 3 sites, in terms of harm, all 3 sites have a harm rating of low. We've also taken into account the findings of the settlement role and function study, which found Pembury to be suitable to accommodate growth in the plan. And also, again, the landscape sensitivity has been a factor. Also, impact on remaining greenbelt from the release of the site, so negligible harm to the remaining greenbelt as set out in the reports. And also looking at the development strategy topic paper, for example, sets out the rationale. So it identifies that they are sustainable sites located on the edge of the settlement where there will be localised impact, and also release of the sites from the green belt, enabling there to be the creation of a much stronger boundary to the green belt, so in accordance with the NPPF, and also the other site specific, so taking account of the landscape work that's been done, and also the ability to provide access to the remaining green belt. So the cycle links in particular are a benefit for that, and the linkages with the cycle route and public rights of way. And then in particular for sites P1 and P2, other public benefits, namely the provision of the car parking provision on the site P1, and then the safeguarded land for cemetery expansion on P2.
Okay, thank you. So just sticking with the site boundaries and the principle of releasing these sites from the greenbelt before I get into any of the detail. Any comments, observations at this stage from anybody in the room? No, can't see any hands going up. Okay, we'll move on. Whilst we've sort of touched upon landscape and sort of visual impact of these sites, I think it's probably prudent to talk about the Aomb then. So just in terms of the Aomb boundaries, again, for PE 1, 2 and 3, we'll probably take them together in that regard. So all 3 sites within the Aomb, is that correct?
They are, yes.
Yeah. And again, how have you factored that into account within the sort of rationale for choosing to allocate these sites, and obviously mindful that the Aomb boundary, as it crosses over the A21, doesn't it, and goes to sort of the back edge of existing development within Pembury, you know, on the whole. So how have you factored that into account, and what's their justification for residential development given their location within the Aomb?
Okay. Well, obviously through the site assessment process, the location in the Aomb was obviously a matter we considered through that, and in particular looking at the Aomb component parts. In the early stages, we were obviously informed by the landscape sensitivity work that had been done, and has already been touched on already, and it is actually set out in the landscape work conducted by Hankinson Duckett Associates. The landscape sensitivity work for countryside around Tunbridge Wells for Pembury was identifying the southern edge of the settlement as being having lower sensitivity to change, if you like, compared to other areas of countryside around the settlement. So that was a factor. We obviously were informed by site visits and discussions with the council specialist, Mr. Scully, landscape officer, and also discussions with Natural England and the High Weald Aomb unit. And those discussions led us to to form the view that the sites on their own were not major development in the Aomb, but we've taken a precautionary approach and treated them as major on a cumulative basis, given that the combined quantum of development is is around 210 to 220 units. So following on from that, we commission specialist landscape and visual impact assessments for the sites, which have informed the decisions made to continue to allocate them. The LVIA work has informed the developable areas of the sites, and in particular the areas of open space and buffers, and the policy wording themselves. So the requirement for LVIAs to form part of planning applications, and details of height parameters and wireframe visualizations, that kind of thing. So we've been very aware of the location in the Aomb, and have the LVIA work undertaken has informed those decisions and the policy requirements directly. And actually what I would say is that Natural England in reps to the plan, it's clear that they also take the view that individually they're not major development, but cumulatively that they are.
But if these three sites in particular, and we're going to talk about the others, but these three sites in particular, if they were to come forward and obviously create this new sort of built edge to the south of Pembury, then what impacts do you think that would have on the Aomb? Where would the key, so certainly visual impacts be? Where do you think the sort of key viewpoints would be for this development?
Okay, Mr. Scully is going to respond on this point.
Again, so I'm having problems with the video. Either I can't turn it on or I can't turn it off, but at the moment I've just got a video. So I would take you to the overall conclusions and recommendations of the HDA LVA. In terms of the potential for harm to the Aomb, if the recommendations within the report are met, it says the harm is low, and that's the lowest for any of the sites that are proposed within the Aomb. And that's for all three of these sites. And that's your CD 3.96A document. There are two potential issues with views potentially. One is views from the south, and we believe that's effectively mitigated through the significant landscape buffer. There is already a significant tree planting along the A21, but that's within the control of the Highways Authority. And so it's important to have this additional buffer to mitigate that potential effect. And also, as we said, it provides a backdrop because this is on the high ground. So where there are views, they're quite limited because of the existing development built development in Pembury. But even where the new development will be seen, it has a strong backdrop of this new planting as well. So we believe that the mitigation is going to be very effective and sufficient to allow these developments to come forward. And it's just also important to note what Ms. Gilbert said. Individually, these sites are not major. And it is really on a precautionary basis that the council has taken the view that these could have a cumulative effect, particularly in some views from the south, but the mitigation is very strong in that respect, and it is, I think, going to address that issue. And you can see the separation between PE1 and PE2 is quite significant. So we feel this is an appropriate allocation within the Aomb.
I noticed Ms. Gilbert's got a hand up and sort of a couple of other hands gone up, but just in terms of you referred there to mitigation. So in terms of landscape mitigation, we talked about the 40 metre buffer. Is there anything else then within the LVIA work in terms of what that identified as necessary mitigation that has become development requirements, or if not, should become development requirements? So how has it been translated then into the plan?
Yes, it has. I mean, in terms of the actual layout, particularly for P1 and P3, you'll see that firstly, the extent of particularly the TPO woodland and the other parts of land to the east on P1 has been excluded from development. For P3, there's a sort of area within the middle of the development and to the eastern end, which has been where the landscape buffer has been extended to provide that mitigation. There's also the policy requirements about the protection of hedgerows and trees, and as with other allocations, the need for the various studies, in particular very much a site-specific or scheme-specific LVIA, which can address more detailed mitigation. And bearing in mind comments that you've made at previous sessions about that criteria, we will, as we said yesterday, look at some amendments to that to make sure it is perhaps stronger in terms of its application.
And you mentioned heights of development and as of scales of development. So was there anything within the LVIA that pointed to certain areas where, you know, certain scale or height of development would need to be considered or restricted in any particular way?
That's the reasoning really for some of the buffering and the shape of the green landscape buffer. There are some sensitivities around parts of the site, but that will be covered by the site-specific LVIA. In particular, in terms of what the landscape sensitivity study considered, it considered small-scale development, which is two-story housing effectively. That's what the allocation is for. And that sensitivity study, you'll see it's CD 3.102 A, and the summary page for small scale development, you'll see that what is in there, PE8 in that case, is one of the least sensitive sites to that form of development. And that is a figure 4.1. I think Miss Gilbert wanted to say something else about that, if she may, unless you've got. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of points to pick up on. And really it is about, you know, you mentioned about height of buildings, what have you, and this is really the reason why, for example, on policy P3, we have criterion 4, which talks about the need for the LVIA to accompany the application. And in particular, it does say that it will should include details of height parameters and the wireframe visualizations from selected number of viewpoints. So that was the first thing. And the second point I just wanted to pick back up on, sir, was the issue of the landscape buffer to the A21. And you'll note from our hearing statement that the three parties for all three of these sites have submitted a joint position statement to the examination. And at paragraph 1.3.5 of that joint position statement, which is attached at appendix 2 of our hearing statement, it addresses the matter of the strategic landscaping itself, and sets out that the parties will liaise on the design, specification and management prescriptions of that to ensure there is a consistent approach across the three sites that will deliver in the long term a singular landscape feature. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll go to some participants now. So again, just dealing at this stage with sort of site boundaries and the way in which council has sort of drawn residential development areas and the effects on the greenbelt of the Aomb before we get into some of the detail. I can see Graham Hall's got his hand up.
Good morning, sir. Can you hear me? Thank you. I welcome the opportunity to be here, obviously, on behalf of Pembury residents. I welcome the statements that I've heard from both Ellen and David regarding the landscaping and buffers. I just refer to the fact that Mr. Scully mentioned views from the south. He didn't mention anything about views from the north. And that has come up very much from our consultation with residents, because there is a public footpath that goes along that northern boundary, the buffer zone that has been mentioned. So I would appreciate some comments about that if possible. And the issue of noise by the buffer zone being put in, I understood that some additional buffer protection was likely to be needed in certain places along the A21. And I would hope that they would be linked to mixing in with the greenery that is around, rather than being very stark noise fences that have been noticed on some main roads. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And over to council if they want to.
Yes, thank you. Criteria 7 mentions any necessary noise attenuation, and noise is a very complex issue, and it is, I think, probably likely that in places a noise attenuation fence might be required, but that can be incorporated within the buffer zone. And again, with such a deep buffer zone, that need not be visually intrusive. I did briefly mention views from the north, or certainly from the northeast, in terms of views from the existing settlement. The buffer in that case will provide a backdrop to development, so that there's it doesn't become a prominent skyline feature. There is a footpath. I'll just check the footpaths that are in the area there to make sure I give you any references. I said this is mostly on the high ground. The footpath runs within PE2 at the moment, and between P2 and P3. There then is a footpath that goes off to the west, furthest at the very end of PE3, but there's the only footpaths within this sort of settlement where you'll get views are between existing residential areas. There's also the footpath that goes between P2 and P1, which rises up to the crest of the A21. So there is within P2, there is a potential views to the south, if you like, from within the site, but they are mostly at the moment screened by the highways vegetation, and that footpath will be incorporated within the buffer. So I think those matters will be addressed, and again can be further refined through the scheme-specific LVIAs.
Yeah, and within, certainly, I'm just looking at the requirements of PE1, and that talks about the landscape buffer, and it obviously says, in addition to existing vegetation along the A21. So it's clear there that there's going to be some, appropriate landscaping scheme required. Okay, I'll go to the Pembury Parish Council's got their hand up.
Oh, hang on. Thank you very much. So I'm Alison Erdley. I'm the planning consultant that's been working with the Parish Council on the development of their neighbourhood plan, which is currently out to consultation at Regulation 14. I just wanted to pick up on the views perspective, just to emphasise that quite a lot of work has been undertaken in consultation with the local community about the views that Graham Hall, my colleague at Pembury, just mentioned. And we've identified 3 specific points along that ridgeline at the back of those sites where we'd look to try and safeguard long distance views, which reach as far as the North Downs, and also views from that footpath that are afforded of Pembury Church, which is quite significant given that the footpaths that we're talking about, so it's WT 239A that cuts across there, links further back to an old historic routeway. So we consider that that is a very important sort of landmarker, as an approach to the village that would have historically been viewed by anyone coming from that direction that we'd want to safeguard. And whilst we appreciate that development can't necessarily safeguard all of it, we'd want to make sure that those viewpoints are afforded for anyone walking along that footpath. And obviously we have submitted our Reg 14 to Tunbridge Wells, so hopefully that can be incorporated. Thank you.
Just in terms of the development requirements, then let's just have a quick look at these where it's, let's see, does it consider viewpoints? I thought it did. Under the LVIA requirement, where's it gone?
Criteria 9, sir.
Where's it got? Yeah, 9. So criterion 9 on PE1. So the development requirements for PE1 and PE2. So PE2 has got layout and design of development informed by a landscape visual impact assessment, key viewpoints. So that's PE2.
Yeah, there isn't specific reference to the key viewpoints in PE1.
No. Given the relationship to each other and their location, do you think, obviously PE2 and PE3 have got this LVIA requirement, and we've already talked about modifications throughout the plan where sites are in the Aomb, just to make it clear, it's what's required. Do you think PE1 then also needs to have the same development requirement? It sounds like this would be required of a scheme anyway, potentially.
Yeah, I think we can make them consistent and make sure that those requirements are in place.
Yeah. Okay, go to I think Anna Hawkins next, got a hand up. Oh, I think you're on mute, sorry.
Hi, I'm Anna on behalf of the British Law Society. Good morning. Just in terms of improvements to public access, especially in compensation for removal of greenbelt land, I would just ask, as we've in our submissions, for the footpath to be upgraded to a bridleway status, that's WT 240 within the area, and then any new routes, so considering equestrians alongside cyclists and walkers, that's our request, please.
When
Yeah.
we talked about the
it was the Hawkenbury, sir.
It was Hawkenbury, wasn't it? We talked about this and potential links through to Pembury. So do you just want to sort of build upon that and what just explain what you were talking about at the Hawkenbury session and how it maybe links in with Pembury?
Yes, my colleague Ms. Gilbert will explain how that will be delivered. But in essence, if you go to our hearing statement, Appendix A, and there you can see the link between Pembury and Hawkenbury, Tunbridge Wells. The WT240, unfortunately I've got a black and white set colour version here, but is the link starting from Pembury, crossing the A21 down into the valley, and then you'll see there's a different colour, which is a unsurfaced public footpath. And the proposal is that this entire route becomes a bridleway.
That's to Chalkett Lane.
That's correct. And the improvements necessary to make that happen are set out in the policy and within the agreement between the developers, which Ms. Gilbert will talk about. It is in terms of, it is correct to say, as Elizabeth Aikenhead said when we were discussing Hawkenbury, that there is an application in to make that a bridleway, that section. So I think one way or t'other, it's likely that that can be achieved.
Yeah.
And that's where we are. Do you want to? And Miss Gilbert's going to say a little bit more.
Thank you. So this is covered in the joint position statement submitted by the three parties. So Mr. Scully has explained the intention. We've had extensive discussions with the three parties for the sites, but also have party to those discussions has been the Kent County Council Public Right-of-Way team, and they've actually been really involved with making sure that we develop the policies and develop the scheme with the site promoters and developers to ensure that there are improvements to that route that can be achieved and delivered. And the intention is that the three parties would provide a proportionate financial contribution towards the delivery of that. And the public right-of-way team at Kent County Council have agreed that they feel it best that they project manage and deliver the upgrades, and they will also deal with the associated legal changes, negotiations with the landowners, etc. So we're very confident that this will be a real significant benefit coming out of these proposals, and will actually be an improvement in terms of the equestrian side of things. And that is all pointed out in the joint position statement. Talks further about the work that we'd be involved. And actually the other thing that is of note is that in the discussions that have taken place, Kent County Council, the public right-of-way officer, did actually go and visit the sites and actually walk the route of these proposed upgrades. So they have had site visits, not just by the consultants acting on behalf of the developer, but by the Kent public rights-of-way officer as well.
Thank you.
This was a specific question that I asked actually, and we jumped ahead, but given that we're talking about it now, it makes sense to cover it, which was question 7. And I said, is it clear to decision makers, developers and local communities how planning applications should consider improvements? And I think this was under point 4, proposals should consider opportunities for the provision of a cycle route link from the southern edge of the settlement to Pembury, running south over the A21 to link with the side of Royal Tunbridge Wells at Hawkenbury. in terms of the policy requirement, then this goes back to what we talked about on other days. It's having the effectiveness of the policy, and it goes back to that concern I said about a developer saying, well, we considered it and we've not done it. And so again, do you think that point 4 needs tweaking in that regard potentially?
Well, it does indeed. So
Yes.
what we will do is take the opportunity to look at all the policies in this regard and make sure that there is a requirement to provide rather than to consider.
Yeah, and actually, so sorry, Paul, in our hearing statement, we have set out suggested modifications. So building on the development of really the engagement with the parties over recent months. So the fact that we have got more detailed proposals that have come together for the upgrades in consultation with KCC. So as the plans developed and the discussions with the 3 parties have progressed, we've got a clearer understanding now of what's expected. So in our hearing statement, we have set out suggested modifications to capture the expectations.
And in terms of this, then, is the expectation that what would the developers be required to do? Would it be a financial contribution?
It would be, yes, sir, which would KCC would then use to take the upgrades forward and deliver those improvements.
Okay, Mr. Buckwell.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Jonathan Buckwell, DHJ Planning, on behalf of Countryside Properties, who are promoting site PE3. We have been very strongly supportive of these proposals all the way through, and the proposed link to Hawkenbury is very much something that came out of early discussions, which we've been keen to put forward. So just to confirm that, and it's certainly all of the work that has been done to date. Very much, it appears that this is a sensible and viable upgrade that will provide some benefits. I think the one comment I would just make, if Tunbridge Wells are going back to reconsider the wording, there are 2 cycle links essentially that are being proposed here. We've got the one that runs across the south side of Pembury, linking all of the development sites together. That's a really important cycle link. It links into the Pembury Road cycle link, which takes cyclists all the way into Tunbridge Wells, and it also links into the newer route to Tunbridge that was provided as part of the A21 dualling. So that particular route really is extremely important to these allocations. The route to Hawkenbury is one that clearly goes cross country. It would be more of a leisure route, but it would provide a really useful direct link, particularly to the sports hub at Hawkenbury, and also that there's a significant employer over at Hawkenbury, and also it's quite an attractive route to go from there into the centre of Tunbridge Wells as well. So we very much support it. The one comment I would make is, because that route crosses third-party land, it's something that the developers have less control over. That's why we were more comfortable with the wording that was in the local plan at the moment, because there may be a scenario where, for whatever reason outside everyone's control here, that route couldn't be delivered. Now, it's not looking that would be the case. All of the work that's been done to date very much suggests that is deliverable, and we'd be very happy to make a contribution towards that, if that's proportionate. But I just would urge that slight bit of caution about making sure that the wording doesn't prevent these developments coming forward if in a scenario where, for whatever reason outside of everyone's control, that route couldn't be delivered.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the wording needs to be carefully, some careful consideration to the wording, so that it wouldn't preclude sites coming forward if there was if something cropped up, but it just needs to go beyond just a consideration. So it's a bit of a careful thinking about the wording. But yeah, points noted.
Yeah, we've noted that, so thank you.
Mr. Scully?
Just to reassure you, sir, just to make clear that the link to between Pembury and Hawkenbury is an existing footpath. So, and that link, that small section, is very, very poor at the moment. But the KCC, as the highway authorities, can upgrade and improve that as a footpath without any landowner issues arising. It's the completion of it as a bridleway which raises particular concerns that have been mentioned.
Mr. Hall?
Yes, thank you, sir. Reference to the cycleways that have just come up linking to Pembury Road. We find some disturbance here with the understanding of how the cycle and footpath links between P3, 2 and 1, which we fully support, about how they are going to link up with the Pembury Road cycle link that is already in existence. In our submission, we mentioned the problems with the High Street and the current access points from P2 and 1 onto the High Street. And I just wanted to raise that in case there was a feeling or understanding that this was straightforward. I fear that this is far from straightforward, the link onto the High Street.
Okay, thank you. So council want to come back on that particular point?
Yes, I will. Just to identify, and I have met sort of outside of obviously the examination with the parish on a few occasions now, and earlier on this year a colleague and I met with Mr. Hall to go through the cycle routes, and we discussed the LC WIP, so the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which has identified the cycle routes along Pembury High Street as a route for improvement going forward. And we explained that there will obviously be further work done to establish that. The intention is that the east-west cycle route across the 3 sites will link with that, and it's my understanding that the parties are looking at the detail of that link as part of the transport assessment work that they're doing to inform the pre-application discussions and future planning proposals for these sites.
Mr. Lulham, please.
Thank you, sir. I'm Paul Lulham from DHA, acting on behalf of Countryside, and as a side, I also act for promoters of Site P1 on transport planning matters. Yeah, to echo what Ms. Gilbert's just said, we have already had some extensive pre-application engagement, both with the planning authority led by Ms. Gilbert and also with the highway authority, KCC, where one of the detailed matters for discussion has been the matter of the cycle links, with specific regard to the east-west route. There are a couple of options for how that then emerges onto the high street from site P1. What one is through the new site access onto the high street. The other is potentially via the village hall. From that point to the west, the high street is relatively wide. There are already advisory cycle lanes marked on the carriageway. There's the potential, I think, for those to be made mandatory lanes where vehicle parking, etc., is prohibited. And there's also the potential for them to be protected with curbing or wands in certain areas between accesses to properties. I think that is all very viable in principle. KCC Highways certainly believe so, and we have new cycle design guidance from the Department for Transport, LTN 120, to work to, which is very much adopted as part of the Tunbridge Wells LC WIP, and we will be applying as we move forward towards planning applications. But in principle, I think all parties are agreed that there is certainly the capability to provide a high quality link to the existing Pembury Road route at the traffic signals up at Woodgate Corner.
And just Mr. Lulham, where's the new access for PE1? Where will that be taken from?
So it's essentially it's opposite the property known as Sunhill Court on the northern side of the high street. To the south of that, immediately to the south of that, there is a close boarded fence, if you can see that on the street view that you have access to, and the access is proposed as a priority junction through that land. I can get you the number of the property if that would assist, but it is essentially opposite the property known as Sunhill Court.
Okay, go to the Parish Council next, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just going to reiterate that's really pleasing to hear about the access onto the high street. But I would reiterate that at the moment, the high street cycle lane, as it's described, is unfit for purpose. There is always traffic parked on it, so it is unusable as a cycle lane. And I think at the moment, the policies in the local plan talk about at clause 4 of ALP1, for instance, exploring and where feasible, improving that high street cycle lane. I think if we're going to go to the effort of, which we fully support, of integrating cycling and walking through sites PE1 to PE3, that high street has to be fit for purpose and usable as a cycle lane linking through to Tunbridge Wells. And at the same time, link the other side to the east, how that's going to link up where you've also got a major junction of the A21. So we'd like to, I think, see that more fully fleshed out in the local plans that is definitely going to happen and be supported.
Okay, does Council want to, a couple of questions there. Does Council want to come back on any points before we move on?
No, just to say we can look at that wording, sir, but obviously just be aware that obviously we've flagged it up. It's in the LC WIP for improvement, so we are aware that there are current difficulties with using that, principally because of on-street parking, which I think we'll deal with when we get on to your question about the parking on P1. But we'll take a look at that, sir.
Yeah, so within PE1 then, what's the justification for this then? So it's what development requirement is development requirement number 2. There shall be additional parking provision for approximately 30 spaces within the design of the scheme to serve the adjacent village hall and the wider public. The area for which is shown indicatively on the site layout plan, I think that's shown as a sort of purple area as community use. I'm assuming that's where that is envisaged. So what's the justification for this then, just in terms of obviously its inclusion within the allocation and also its location within the allocation?
Yeah, okay. Well, it stemmed originally from you'll see that in the Reg 18 draft local plan, we were allocating or proposing this area, the sites of the purple area, for community use. And back at that time, there was the potential that it may have been to facilitate a new medical facility for Pembury, which the CCG, so the Clinical Commissioning Group, subsequently confirmed as the planned strategy progressed wouldn't be required. So through the Reg 18 consultation, a number of representations had referred to parking issues for Pembury, concerns about lack of parking, and the Parish Council, for example, had referred to there being a dire shortage of parking in the village. And having sort of considered those representations, and knowing that the draft local plan at that time had proposed parking as part of the community facility, and to support the village hall, it seemed an opportunity to consider whether or not the car parking should actually be made available for the wider community more generally, so not just to serve the village hall. And you'll see that the Parish Council has supported that both at the Reg 18 and Reg 19 stages of the plan. And whilst not an examination document, it's worth just noting that the emerging Pembury neighbourhood plan does have a specific policy about the provision of this parking. And if you bear with me, I would just like to find the policy number, because it does make it clear in the emerging neighbourhood plan that it wouldn't just be village hall parking. So it's policy number P14, paragraph 9.14, where it talks about the paragraph 9.12, sorry. So the village hall has limited spaces, and it talks about cars being parked out on the high street. And then paragraph 9.14 refers to the proposals in the submission local plan, but then goes on to say that the Pembury neighbourhood plan supports this, and would also, and talks about then electric charging points, etc. So there is that support for this parking provision from the parish. In terms of the location, it's quite difficult to find a location within the settlement generally that would be very well located to serve all the different areas of the village, because it's Pembury village is quite triangular. You've got three sort of distinct elements of the village, and also, the information we've got in terms of the consultations on the plan and the work that the neighbourhood plan group have done, there doesn't seem to be any alternative provision being looked at to provide some parking for the village. And what we saw here, it was a planning judgment really by officers, that we had an opportunity, a landowner and a developer who is willing to provide this parking that would be a benefit not just to the village hall but the wider community, which in itself would help with the on-street parking situation that others have described. And again, it helps free up the high street, to help with these cycle link improvements. So we do feel it is justified, and will actually be a real benefit arising from the scheme.
A couple of questions about the car park then. So where would it be accessed from, and how would it be, who would be responsible for it? Okay,
so in terms of access, the car park forms part of the development site for PE1, and the indicative master plans we've seen from the site promoter up to this point indicate that it would be accessed from the access roads leading off the high street into the site itself, so serving the residential aspect of the site. In terms of maintenance and management, it's very much a matter that would be dealt with at the planning application stage, and obviously dealt with through the legal agreement. So we appreciate there is discussion to be had both with the parish and the village hall committee about that, and that's something we'd obviously encourage with the developer as we go forward. The developer for this site, out of the three sites along the southern edge of Pembury, this P1 site is the site that has relatively recently got a developer on board, so they're not quite as progressed with their plans for the site as the other two sites along here.
And if it was accessed from the main site access, do you think it's going to be used? So if people are parking their cars on High Street, presumably, you know, local residents or visitors to properties on High Street are, you know, parking their cars presumably outside their houses or as near to their houses as they can. Do you think that then somebody would think, well, okay, I'll drive down this access, this new development, and I'll go and park my car, you know, 3, 4, 5 minutes walk away at the back of the village hall? Or do you think they'll just continue to just park their cars on the street where they can see them outside their properties?
Well, we have indicated a possibility of providing a pedestrian link through to the village hall, which would then link through to the high street.
So again, also you mentioned some of the issues around parking at the village hall. So again, is that something you're looking to do there? Presumably, you know, visitors to the village hall, for example, you know, so they can sort of easily access that existing community use. Is that something that can be achieved then, an access through? Because it looks on the plan that it's immediately at the back of the village hall. So is there an access that can be taken through there, or is that not something that the parish council are looking to do?
Well, I'm sure Mr. Hall will comment on that, but I know my colleague, Mr. Scully, wishes to make a comment.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Scully first, and then we'll come back to Mr. Hall.
Sorry, so obviously, in terms of the car park itself, there can be management of that. There can be ways of controlling whether that it becomes used by, you know, inappropriately in the way that you've sort of described, really, that would block it up in terms of the intended purpose. So I think those matters that can be dealt with, but I'll see what Mr. Hall has to say.
Okay, Mr. Hall.
Yes, thank you, sir. We fully support everything that has been said so far about the need for and the justification for some extra car parking in this area. The general discussion has been that it's adjacent to the village hall within P1, which is excellent. The management, obviously we haven't gone into great details about how this will be done, but as Mr. Scully has said, there could be issues about the length of time and that people would be parked there, so that would link in with the requirements of the village hall, and perhaps people visiting the village from outside to use the facilities in the village. So I think that is doable. As Ellen Gilbert has mentioned, we're not that far advanced yet, obviously, in terms of management agreements, obviously waiting for this part of the plan to be discussed. But certainly we are in full support of the car park there. If I might add, we would like more than 30 places if that's possible, because the current number of places outside the village hall is very limited. You could squeeze in more cars there, but you would find it very difficult to get out. It's a very narrow entrance currently to the village hall. Thank you.
Mr. Lawler.
Yeah, thank you. So just very briefly, on behalf of the site promoter, I know we're very supportive of facilitating this provision. I think, you know, your point around sort of natural surveillance and security, clearly the development will be conceived in such a way that there is natural surveillance from new development of that car park. We fully intend to engage with the parish council in more detailed level over the coming months as our application is prepared. The stretch of the high street, sort of in the vicinity of the existing village hall access, is that bit narrower, is subject to parking restrictions, and therefore on-street parking, certainly during the main part of the day, is not quite such an issue in that location. Further to the west, as I've said, where the advisory cycle lanes are and the high street is that much wider, you do get more on-street parking, and that does interfere with the cycle route and with traffic flow to a greater degree. As I've said, as part of the delivery of that enhanced cycle route, measures would be introduced to address some of that. So I think all of these things will encourage use of that new provision.
Okay, thank you. And one of the questions was about that I asked was about how you'd actually implement this and sort of tie it to the development. And I think there's reference. Let me just have a quick look. Is there reference to, I think, does the plan refer to a legal agreement? Let's have a quick look.
It does, and I think it's actually dealt with by your question 8.
Yeah. So which development requirements this? Oh yeah, so it's 11, isn't it? And again, I think again we can just look at the word. It might not be, you know, there are other ways in which this could be provided, so it's just about providing sufficient flexibility that this is actually clearly there needs to be a sort of hook to provide it and ensure that it's delivered and provided in a timely way. But like I think you said, that there are other ways of doing this, so it could just be details of the provision and future management of the area of car parking to be provided as part of the plan application.
Yeah, and actually it's worth just noting that paragraph 118 and 119 of our hearing statement in response to this question, we have said we've taken the opportunity to consider it further, and actually we do feel it can be dealt with through a combination of planning condition and legal agreement.
Yeah, I think in terms of the wording there, it could be again, it goes back to sort of less is more really, and it's just the suitable provision of mechanism, and then that could be anything, can't it? Really, it gives you the flexibility to ensure that, you know, at a plan application stage you can consider various options, but the key issue is covered, i.e., making it sure it's provided and considering its ongoing management thereafter, essentially. I think that probably covers all the questions that I had. I know we've jumped around, but it feels like it sort of flowed a bit more naturally in terms of considering these issues. Obviously, we've talked about the Greenbelt boundary. We've talked about the Aomb in particular. We've talked about the access, the cycle links, the bridleway links, the area of car parking, etc. Was there anything else on PE1 in terms of the detail that anybody wanted to raise at this stage? No. Yeah, we talked about legal mechanisms, talked about the car park. Okay. It's coming to 11 o'clock, but I think what might be useful, because we've talked about PE 1, 2, and 3 together, is if we just carry on then and look at some of the details of PE 2 and 3, if you're okay to do so. And then it'll probably take us to a sort of a natural break in 20 minutes or so, if people are happy to continue. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the boundaries of these sites as a whole. We've talked about the green belt. We've talked about the reasons why the green belt boundary sort of continues in between sites PE1 and PE2 then. So site-specific details for PE2. So this includes an area of safeguarded land, which is shown as a sort of peachy pink colour on the inset map. So what's the justification for this area then?
Okay, thank you, sir. Again, it comes back to well, planning officers thinking, you know, flexibly about the plan and infrastructure needs to support the growth in the plan, and the fact that the site is adjacent to the existing cemetery at Pembury. We had discussion with the parish council about the needs of the parish in terms of burial space, cemetery space during the course of the next plan period, which indicated that the current cemetery would be full within the plan period. So the parish council submitted an email with some useful data back in 2019. So that email is attached at Appendix 4 of our hearing statement, which identified that based on current burial rates, the parish council was of the view that the existing cemetery only had provision really of around about another 15 years left, and that they were saying and possibly 12 to 14 years worth of burials if burial rates continued at the current rate. And of course that wasn't taking account of, you know, the pandemic at that time. We also obviously have an ageing population, and Pembury as a parish, and particularly Pembury Village, there have been a number of care home type developments in recent times. So Cornford Court, for example, that has the planning permission, and now the more recent Owl's Nest, and then the proposal at the Woodsgate Corner site. And the parish council were strongly supportive of the principle of ensuring that some land is safeguarded within the allocation to cater for the future needs of the parish. So that's really the justification behind it. And again, the site promoters are not opposed to that provision, although there is a difference in opinion in the extent of land to be safeguarded. The parish council are of the view that they're likely to require the full extent of the land that this submission plan indicates for that expansion. Thank you.
So a couple of questions about this then. So who owns that land at the moment?
I believe it is the parish, yeah. Sorry, Mr. Hall may be able to confirm that.
Yeah, sorry, there's Mr. Warren has got his hand up. I'm not sure if he could come in at this stage.
Morning, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Oh no, sorry, it's not the parish, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Warren, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. Great. Okay. Yeah, so I was picking up on the point actually. I represent Obsidian, who are the promoters of PE2, sir. And the safeguarded land is within the control of Obsidian. So, you know, we support in principle the provision of an extension to the cemetery. What we are suggesting to the council is that the land shouldn't be safeguarded just for the cemetery. As you can see in the evidence within the council's hearing statement, the parish believe that there's around 15-year availability already within the existing cemetery, and the large part of land to be included within the safeguarded land would, in our calculation, provide another 50 or 60 years worth of provision. So within our promotion, what we are saying is that, yes, we agree with the principle of allowing the extension of the cemetery, but it should also be safeguarded for open space as well, because, you know, it's not needed in the short term. So what's it going to be used for until it's required for the cemetery? It would provide a good opportunity to provide some public accessible open space as part of the development scheme, and then the parish could, you know, take back parts of that site as it needs to in the future. But, you know, it seems unreasonable to safeguard the whole of that site for a cemetery which is not required for the first 15 years, and there is, you know, capacity for, you know, 60 years also worth of cemetery space going forward, and it's, you know, unclear at this stage whether that is actually required or not. So all we're saying is we support the principle of extending the cemetery, but we think it should be safeguarded for open space as well as cemetery, so that it could be used or put to use in the short term as well.
What's the, is probably a question for the council, what's the justification for actually even including this in the allocation? Is it the land ownership and the fact that it can only be presumably delivered with the landowners, see on board? So why include it within the housing allocation? Why not just have a housing allocation as PE2 and then just a separate area, a separate allocation or a separate area of safeguarded land for this type of use?
Okay, right. Sorry, sir. First of all, I apologise for saying it was parish council land. It isn't. So a momentary lapse on my part there. And as Mr. Warrener has indicated, it is under the control of Obsidian, who do have the option on the land. So, and it is purely that it's to ensure that the land is made available from the landowner. And the intention is that it would be through a Section 106 or other legal mechanism be handed to the parish council, who would then be responsible for taking the site forward. And obviously, if it's not sort of included in the allocation, there's a risk that it won't be made available for that purpose.
And just in terms of your comments or consideration then of Ms. Warren is suggesting the plan should be changed to allow obviously potentially further flexibility, mentioned areas of open space, etc., given the size of the parcel available and calculation of future needs, etc. Yes,
we have considered that, sir, and I think in principle there isn't necessarily an objection, but I think that there are concerns in that obviously if in the shorter term it gets used for an alternative use, it could create a problem further down the line. So when it becomes needed for the cemetery, you then have to find an alternative location for the uses that's been occurring on the site in the meantime. Although I do know, obviously, Mr. Hall may wish to comment as well, because I do know that the parish has been approached to potentially use the site by the cricket club.
Yeah, so obviously, what's the use of land at the moment? Is it just a field, open field, I presume?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So obviously, we'll sort of go forward. PE2 becomes developed, comes forward as a housing allocation, and it's built out. What then becomes of that land in the sort of in the meantime? Is it the council's intention that as part of the planning permission that this would be, let's say, transferred to the parish council, but then what does it become until 10, 15 years, however many years down the line it actually needs to be required as a cemetery? What would it become, and what would it be used for?
That is the intention, that it would be transferred to the parish, and
but what would it, obviously it's not needed. It's not needed now by the sounds of things. So what would it be? What would it be used for in that sort of intervening period? Presumably it's not going to become, well, I don't know. Presumably it's not going to be continued to use as in an agricultural use by the parish council. So what would become of this land for potentially sort of 10, 15 years?
Okay. Yes, it does have the potential to be used by a recreational use in the short term. And as I've indicated, the parish council have already been approached by the cricket club to potentially be used by them in the short term. I think Mr. Hall would like to say something on that, but also my colleague, Mr. Scully. And obviously a recreational use, of course, would not be inappropriate development in the green belt.
So I just wanted to add, I mean, yes, it's not agriculture. It won't be maintained as agricultural land in such a short period, particularly as it's sort of isolated. And it could have a temporary recreational use, and that would be up to the parish council. I think the concern of linking it as recreational space with the development is that there will be a need for the development to provide recreational space, and that need for recreational space or play space is never going to go away. So if you do allow it as part of the development and meeting the needs of the development in terms of play space, that would prevent it in the future from being used as the cemetery. That's the only point I wish to make, but Mr. Hall may have something to say.
Okay, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, sir. During the period of time when this land is allocated, and if is allocated to the parish council, we will need to have some time for planning road access and turning points and measurements and various preparations, obviously, before we actually start to use it. So there will be some time needed. There are obviously some access points that will need to be looked at. Regards the cricket club, we are obviously sympathetic and supportive of community developments, and particularly for young people, which is what the cricket club is expanding into. And we are we have agreed that we would discuss with the cricket club some part of the land that will be useful to them, and they are quite keen to go forward with the discussions for that if the land is safeguarded and allocated.
Presumably that would need its own separate planning application, though, would it not, if you started changing the use of the land?
We are aware of the Tunbridge Wells planners' use of the meanwhile wording for use of an area while it is being prepared for an alternative use. So I would suggest that might be the way that Tunbridge Wells planners would suggest moving forward. But we're very open and flexible in discussions about that issue.
Mr. Warrener?
Thank you. I think this conversation provides the example, really. It kind of illustrates why I think there needs to be, a safeguard for cemetery and open space recreational use, because at this stage of the process, we don't know how much land is required for the cemetery. We don't know whether some of that land will be provided for the cricket club or other recreational or open space requirements. That level of assessment, feasibility, etc., just hasn't been done yet. So whilst we're supportive of, assisting by providing land for the extension to the cemetery, there clearly is not a requirement, and all that land, as I say, surely isn't required for the cemetery. There's no there's no justification for the size which has been required to be safeguarded. So I think, until that work has been done and until it's clear how the cemetery extension will be accommodated within that larger piece of land, I think it would be better to safeguard it for open space, recreation and cemetery use.
Okay, just take the council's views then on that suggested change. It sounds like whoever was to remain sort of either in control of the land or use land, it sounds like it's not going to clearly immediately be used for the cemetery. Obviously, Mr. Hall's explained, obviously it's going to take time to actually get details and plans in place as to how you can access it, use it, etc. And Ms. Roy has obviously pointed out, as the amount of land that's needed and having that link with the sort of amount of burial plots that would be required. So, just council's views then on that suggested change.
So there's no reason why the policy shouldn't be amended to admit informal recreational use in the interim, provided the longer-term ambition for at least part of the site is maintained. So we can amend the policy to give it that flexibility.
And if I could just add as well, that there is all, Mr. Hall's spoken about the cricket club, and we've touched on the need for planning consent. It could be that in the interim some kind of temporary permission is granted, which would help with the issue about ensuring that the land is available for the cemetery in the longer term.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Mr. Sheridan's point. It sounds like it's clearly potentially we just don't know how much land is going to be needed and when. So it sounds like there needs to be some flexibility worded into that then that considers the sort of the shorter term implications of this. And obviously as a council, you've got your 5-year review of your local plan anyway. So within 5 years, this is exactly the sort of thing that you can review and update as necessary.
Exactly, yeah.
Go to the parish council's got a hand up.
We've both got our hand up, actually.
Both got our hands up, actually. Sorry.
Graham, I was just going to make the point, and I think David Scully touched on it earlier, that there's clearly a case that has been demonstrated for the need for additional cemetery space, and it's understood that obviously that's going to take time, and there could be opportunities for other use of that space while that is happening and while that need is being built up. But I think we'd be very keen to see that, as that open space is then relinquished for cemetery space potentially, that will have a knock-on effect on the amount of open space that's potentially provided across that site in the longer term. And certainly as part of the neighbourhood plan work and the design guidance that we've been putting together, there's strong support locally for green space to be integrated within development. So the rest of that site that is being developed, we wouldn't want no green space to be provided because it's relying on this green space that's being safeguarded, which over time might be eroded. At the same time, there's also a concern about if that is used for recreational purposes, because of its location next to an existing cemetery, there is some concern about what use that might be that's going to complement the neighbouring and surrounding uses. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Graham.
I don't know if you can see me, but I've lost the screen at the moment. I apologise. But okay. I support what you... Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see and hear you, okay.
Can you? Well, I can't. I can see you, sir, but I can't see anyone else. We support exactly what Alison has just said, obviously. And we will need that space in the future. There is no question about the size of that safeguarded land, particularly as there is current consultation on new regulations and sizes of burial plots that have not been completed yet, but it looks like we're going to need slightly larger spaces for each site. So there is no question of the need for that site eventually. And because we need to plan access into that site, that is the reason why we need the whole site to be safeguarded for our use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to a couple of questions to get through, and then we'll go to a break. So for PE2 then, in terms of site access, again, where's the site access proposed from? And presumably KCC have been involved in discussions with regard to the allocation. It looks like it's got a larger site frontage than PE1. But any concerns about site access?
Yes, so the site access would be from Hastings Road, and our response is dealt with under question 14 of our hearing statement. The Obsidian and DHA Transport have had discussions with KCC Transport, and that is ongoing. I'm sure Mr. Warriner will update you. I've had an update this week from the consultants. There was an initial discussion about whether or not to provide the visibility displays for the site. A very small slither of land from third-party land would be required. However, it does appear that the access design is likely to be capable of being amended to avoid the need for that visibility display, incorporating the third-party land, which is just to the left of the proposed site access off Hastings Road.
So is the intention then that, because there's an existing site access there, isn't there? So is the intention to sort of essentially reuse that, and then I don't know what the street to the north is called, but then be some sort of staggered junction arrangement, presumably?
That's right, sir. And the road to the north is Belfield Road, and indeed there is a scope there for the staggered junction. And the technical issue with highways has been ensuring that the visibility display can be provided.
Okay, Mr. Warriner.
Thank you. And yes, really, just to support what Helen said, we have had pre-app discussions with KCC and Tunbridge Wells about the access. The initial proposals was more of a crossroads with Belfield Road. KCC didn't like that approach, so we've looked at a staggered approach. We can meet KCC standards. There was a question some time ago whether we needed a really small slither of third-party land, but in actual fact we have now got a scheme which is in front of the council and subject to pre-app, which doesn't require that. So we're pretty confident that we can get the access in without any problems. I would also like to raise the fact that KCC standards are quite substantial here, really, in the context of the parish in particular, and within their neighbourhood plan, which you may see wanting to not have over-engineered access solutions on this road and to improve the size of the walkways and improve kind of modal shift on these roads. So, and there's also, the 20s plenty objective as well from the parish. So at the moment, the access is actually designed for 30 miles an hour, and we can achieve that. But we would hope, actually, with further consultation with KCC, not such an over-engineered junction would need to be provided. But we can provide the worst case scenario, I suppose, sir. So anything better can be accommodated.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, observations on the proposed site access arrangements PE2? No. Okay. So again, we talked about the boundaries. We talked about the greenbelt. We talked about the Aomb for these sites. We've talked about some of the policy wording around the cycle improvements and how this all sort of fits together. So we've talked about that. We've talked about the safeguarded land. So was there anything else on PE2 that anybody wished to raise? No. And again, in terms of PE3, we've touched upon, again, we talked about the area of residential development. We've talked about its Aomb status. We've talked about greenbelt boundaries, etc. Just in terms of PE3, then it's very nearly split in half. And again, we talked about the area of landscaping. Is the intention with PE3 that it would have 2 access points or just the 1? It may just be the scale that the map's drawn at on the policies map, but it almost looks as if the boundary to the site almost splits it into 2. Is that the intention, or would it just be 1 site access there?
It would just be 1 site access taken off Hastings Road. The planning consultants acting on behalf of the developer, though we have had initial meetings with Kent Highways, firstly on a technical scoping note, which doesn't appear to be indicating that there is any issue with the principle of providing the single access off Hastings Road. The consultants have also engaged with National Highways, given that the site is adjacent to the junction there with the A21, which likewise doesn't appear to be raising any issues. But I'm sure that Mr. Buckwell may add to what I've said.
Sorry, Mr. Lillam.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'll speak to that for on behalf of the promoters of PE3. Single access has been agreed in principle from Hastings Road with KCC Highways, sir, through a pre-application engagement exercise. And again, with regard to form and visibility displays, that can comfortably be achieved within that frontage. The idea is then that the sort of spine roads within the site was split into 2 to accommodate that sort of landscaping strip running north-south through the site. A secondary emergency access only has been requested by KCC because over 50 dwellings are proposed. That's a threshold that the Kent Design Guide indicates for emergency access, and we're proposing that be provided at the position of the existing gated access to the site on the eastern boundary, sir. That would be restricted through bollards or similar for emergency vehicles only, but also pedestrians and cyclists. So that then enables the sort of continuation, if you like, of the east-west cycle and pedestrian route through the village.
And then, very roughly, then where's it envisaged that the main site's access will be taken from?
So it's broadly sort of centrally along the site frontage, along the northern site frontage. We're probably another sort of 100 metres or so to the west of that. I think in the submission made by Mr. Buckwell on behalf of Countryside, that is indicated in his figure 2.1, page 3 of that representation. There's a red arrow indicating broadly the access location, and there is ongoing design work upon that. The visibility requirements for a 30-mile-an-hour limit are relatively modest, and therefore there is scope for some flexibility as to the access location. So it's not entirely fixed, but it is being informed by other considerations, drainage, ecology, arboriculture, etc. And at the moment, it's indicated broadly in that sort of in that sort of vicinity. I think, as Mr. Warren has said a short time ago, with the parish's aspirations and KCC's, in fact, around reducing vehicle speeds further on Hastings Road and High Street, that visibility display envelope could be reduced still further from that.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments, observations on PE3? Then again, we talked about some of the detailed policy wording requirements which apply to all three of these sites. We talked about the accessibility. We talked about the cycling. We talked about the Aomb and the green belt boundaries. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. The issue of the emergency exit, that I think that is positioned very close to the junction with the A21. And we are having severe issues with a lot of extra traffic coming off the A21, especially when there are issues further up the A21 towards Hastings. This is a big issue, and a lot of heavy goods vehicles, as well as normal cars, are coming off of that slip road, trying to do a bypass of the various roundabouts at Kipping's Cross and Bluecoats, which are further along towards Hastings. We're very concerned about this issue, and so would appreciate that issue is included in all the transport assessment discussions that are going on with the developers and KCC and National Highways.
Mr. Llewellyn.
Yes, sorry, so I'll just get my camera working. But yeah, just to respond directly to that point from Mr. Hall, and he's quite right. We're mindful of that issue. We have had separate pre-application engagement with National Highways, and we are considering impacts on their network and how they could be mitigated if necessary. But certainly we're mindful of it, sir. And part of the reason for citing the vehicular access to this site sort of further to the west is to ensure there is no interference with the operation of the A21 junction. And we'll also be looking at ensuring that safe pedestrian and cycle crossings of Henwood Green Road, as it is at that point, can be accommodated.
Thank you. If you've had discussions with National Highways, then you've been very lucky. We have been trying for a long time to discuss with them this particular issue. So we would appreciate discussions with you as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on PE3 then? No. Don't see any hands going up. No. Okay, we'll go to break then. So mindful it's been going for a couple of hours now, so we'll have a break and then we'll come back and look at the remaining sites in Pembury. We may, as I say, lunch breaks are scheduled about 1 o'clock, so we may sort of just go into this afternoon session, but we should certainly get through these in plenty of time. So we'll have a tea and coffee break then, and we'll resume back at 11:45 then, please. So again, don't log out, just turn cameras and microphones off, and we'll resume back at 11:45.
Sorry, sir, can I just say something? So
yeah.
I'm conscious we've spoken about the access for P2 and P3 in slightly more detail than we did the P1 site. And in our hearing statement, we did say we would provide an update today on the progress of the access for P1. I just wanted to add that the consultants have have liaised further with KCC Highways and had a stage 1 safety audit done of that. And as of yesterday, we've received confirmation from KCC that they are satisfied that the access can be provided in a safe and satisfactory manner. And we have that in writing if that would help you, sir.
Yes, please. That's just, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll break then and we'll resume back at 11:45. Okay, thank you everybody. It's just 1:45, so we'll resume and continue. We looked at sites P1, P2, P3. So continuing in order, then we'll look at site PE4 next. A couple of questions on this one in relation to the site area again. And again, I'm looking at the inset map for Pembury with the submission plan. So again, this has got an area of residential development identified in the orange colour, and it looks like the limits to built development and the area of residential development is ever so slightly smaller than the site allocation. And then also on the inset map, the greenbelt boundary goes up to, I believe, up to the A228, the bypass. So you could just ask the council just to explain then, there's obviously sort of three different boundaries there. You've got the boundary to built development, you've got the boundary to site allocation, you've got the boundary to the greenbelt. Three different boundaries in sort of quite a short area there. So what's the justification for those different boundaries and how have they come about?
I think, well, in essence, the red line on the inset map is the limits to built development, and then the site allocation boundaries is the blue line you can see to the north. And I think we've enabled an area for a buffer along that northern edge, which we don't generally include within the limits to built development. And then the greenbelt boundary, if you bear with me, follows it's set back from the Pembury bypass and has taken account of the open space there. So I think that's something we may have to just review. Oh, David, Mr. Scully is going to say something about that.
So yes, it does look different to other allocations that we've been looking at in the Greenbelt, because it does have on the proposals map that piece of white land, if you like, which is taken out of the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt studies suggested that the road itself is the appropriate new Greenbelt boundary. And that sort of top of embankment line is where it would be appropriate to draw the greenbelt boundary. It could equally be drawn. I would concede against the allocation. It's hard to see. I was just trying to compare the aerial photographs with this inset map to be sure of what the actual feature is along there. There is a very strong tree belt, existing tree belt along that boundary, but I can't, from the information in front of me, confirm exactly where that ends in relation to this allocation. I can check that and come back to you on that if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the greenbelt boundary, we talk about long-term defensible, clearly defined boundaries. Yes, the bypass is the logical boundary. It's the area of white land that's left, and so the question is, well, it looks, and again, I appreciate the council's shares. It looks like that tree belt that's adjacent to the bypass is pretty much the extent of the area of white land. So it may be that the site, so the area of built development stays the same, but then the site allocation boundary just follows the bypass and would encompass that as what it is existing landscape buffer, isn't it, really?
Yes, to incorporate that as a landscape buffer. Yes, I think that would be an appropriate solution. I'd need to visit site again, but the buffer does appear to be more located to the highway. But I think your suggestion is very helpful.
Yeah, I think that'd be the easiest way of tidying it up, because then there's in essence there's no real change to the area of built development. It's just ensuring a consistent boundary line, really.
Yes.
Anybody got any views or comments, observations just on that particular change? It's quite a specific boundary query, really. No. Again, some of these questions we've looked at, but are slightly different in P2 insofar as it's obviously in a different location. So we talked about the site boundary, and within your hearing statement, you talked about the landscape sensitivity assessment as sort of pockets of area adjacent to built-up area. One thing I did want to touch upon was again, obviously, this is a site believed it's fully within the Aomb. So this is a different context to the southern part of Pembury, but nonetheless, it is still obviously an area of land that's adjacent to the built-up area, in between the built-up area and the bypass. So again, just in terms of Aomb landscape considerations, might be worthwhile just summarising for the hearing and others what the council's view is on the sort of landscape impact and why you consider this allocation is justified, bearing in mind that it is still within the Aomb.
Yes, sir. We do not consider, firstly, it's important to notice this is not considered major development either by ourselves or by Natural England. The landscape sensitivity study did identify, which is CD 3.102A, did identify this area as having a medium and medium-high sensitivity to small-scale development, and also it scored well in terms of the contributions to the Greenbelt. And in particular, this area, which was P5 in the stage 2 study, scored relatively weak in relation to the main 4 purposes that were assessed in terms of Greenbelt purposes. It's also a relatively flat site. It is well screened. There's significant woodland to the west, and it's attached to the existing LPD. So in terms of context and so on, it is a less sensitive area, and mitigation can easily be incorporated within the design of the scheme. So that's the basis for its allocation in landscape terms.
Okay, any representations with regard to landscape impact on this particular site? Okay. So this is another site similar insofar as there's an area that's within the site allocation boundary then that's so it's remaining within the green belt as per the submission local plan, but it's an area for safeguarded land. And if we go to the policy, then this is an area which is safeguarded, I believe, for the adjacent hospice. Is that right?
So that is correct. The hospice is a much valued resource for the town and has very, very strong links with the town. There's a number of hospice charity shops within the town, and large significant community events occur around the hospice, including the annual 10K race or run around the common and so on. So this facility and the relationship with the town is quite important, and the purpose is to ensure that the hospice can expand in due course.
Ms Gilbert.
I would just like to add, sir, that in responding to the MIQs on this matter, we have actually reviewed this issue of the safeguarding and retaining in the green belt. And in our response to question 23 and 24, we have actually suggested that you may consider modifying it so that that safeguarded land is actually released from the green belt as well. And we've responded on the points about the need for clearly defined boundaries and exceptional circumstances on that point as well. And the reason why we've reviewed our approach is really down to the progress made by the hospice in really developing its proposals for the site since the submission of the draft local plan, which really acted as a bit of a catalyst really for the hospice to be able to start really thinking about its needs and requirements from this site. So you'll see that in Appendix 5 of the Council's hearing statement, there is a statement submitted on behalf of the hospice, which not only talks about the need, but it talks about the progress made. And really, in light of that progress, we took the opportunity to reconsider the policy requirements. And as I say, we're now suggesting that actually the land could be released from the green belt.
So in terms of the hospice requirements then, so as I've seen the correspondence and the information in the hearing statement, what is it then that the hospice will require in the sort of short to medium term in terms of built development then? What is it that's actually needed?
I don't think we've got anything that sets that out in detail. That you'll see from their statement that they've got various aspirations, and in question, if you bear with me for a moment, I'll just find it. You've got a specific question 25, about the need for the extension. And at paragraph 199 onwards, we talk about that, and where we actually say here, sorry, I have set it out. Sorry, I'm just trying to find, I've referred to particular bits of their statement.
Sorry, Ellen, while you're looking for that, I would just say, so on the map 67, you can see the existing hospice facility below the proposed safeguarded land. And you can see that it is actually quite tight on that side. A few years ago, the area to the south of the existing building which was sort of gardens for visitors and so on, had to be converted to or expanded to car parking because of the car parking is very limited on site. With for staff and for visitors, and they don't have, or they have very limited now external space as garden, which is quite important for both patients and visitors. So it's quite easy to see how even a relatively small expansion of the facility could quite easily fill this land, with appropriate car parking and landscaping and so on. So I think if there's a concern about an over provision, I think it's perhaps not something to worry too much about. But I'll let Ellen speak now.
It's okay. I've just found it. It's paragraph 200 of our hearing statement. Just very briefly outlines that the hospice is confirmed that it's working at full capacity, and is experiencing increasing demand for hospice services as a result of ageing population. And it also has plans to launch a new children's hospice to care for children and young people. And obviously that would be built form, actually on the safeguarded land. And certainly when you read fully the statement submitted by the hospice, they have provided more background information about that need and how it would work.
In the preparation of the plan, why did the council seek to not remove this land from the green belt? Then obviously safeguard if there's potential future expansion. So obviously you're recognising that this is sort of coming along the line, so to speak. Why then did you not seek to remove the site from the green belt at that stage? What was the reasons for keeping it in?
I think at that stage, in brief terms, it was purely to almost ensure that the land was not at risk of coming forward for something other. Although obviously I appreciate that, that's the purpose of safeguarding it. And I think again that's partly why we've reconsidered the position on that.
I think it's also fair to say at the start of the plan making, the plans for the hospice were less clear, and now they are, as Ms Gilbert said, much more progressed.
So what do you consider are the exceptional circumstances then for this, the removal of this site from the green belt? Is this something that can be provided elsewhere? Do they have to be here? Does it have to go in this location? And any other alternatives that are looked at? What really are the exceptional circumstances that would support such a change?
Okay, so again, it's a number of factors, and as with the other sites, we've considered the findings of the Greenbelt study work, and for this particular site, the harm was found to be low to moderate, with negligible harm on the remaining Greenbelt land. It's also sustainable location on the edge of the existing settlement. And in particular, very site specific for this is obviously the fact it's a locational imperative really for the hospice, in that it can't, expansion of the hospice can't reasonably be located elsewhere. So very site specific factors associated with the hospice itself.
And in terms of the site selection process, and we'll come on to talk in a minute about the relationship between the two land uses. But in terms of safeguarding this site then for the hospice, as part of the Sheila work and the work that Kent County Council have done in looking at allocations, was the intention that this would always be provided beyond the plan period? And if so, did statutory consultees, I'm thinking about highways in particular, did they consider the likelihood of this being an enlarged and enhanced hospice at this stage? So obviously, if you were to remove it from the green belt through the main modification process, then it would in effect become allocated for that use. So have statutory consultees, in particular highways, considered that now, or was it just always deferred for, well, this is something that's coming further down the line? Yeah,
no, it has been considered now. When we, in the early stages of the plan making process, and in the interest of good planning, and again thinking about infrastructure needed during the plan period, as I touched on earlier, we contacted the chief exec of the hospice to have a discussion, just to really get a feel for what their likely plans were, and it became clear really that they had these aspirations to deliver this expansion within the plan period. And that was then subsequently obviously worked up into the policy that was included in the draft local plan, discussed with all the necessary infrastructure people, including Kent Highways, and consulted upon at the Reg 18 stage. So it's always been clear that we expect it to come forward in the plan period. And I think the recent statement from the hospice is obviously, sets out that's very clear. They're saying that once the plan is adopted, they will seek to get on and pursue the planning application. So it's been clear to everybody, really through the consultation, that this isn't something that would be a beyond the plan period development.
And in terms of how it's linked then to the residential development at PE4, so a couple of questions to start with then. So in terms of the land to the north of the hospice that's safeguarded, is that within the ownership of the hospice then? Do they own that parcel of land?
No, they don't. The safeguarded land is the same landowner as the wider Downingbury farm. So the area of the residential use and the safeguarded land are currently within the same land ownership.
So how would the hospice deliver their sort of, obviously the council is saying that, this is safeguarded for the hospice site, whether it's safeguarded or allocated sort of in or out of the green belt, how would the hospice then deliver this scheme?
Okay, the hospice is in early stages of discussion with the landowner, and the council has previously met with the landowner to discuss the potential to use some of the land for hospice expansion, and the landowners are supportive of that. And as I say, that the landowner and the hospice are in ongoing discussions about that. There's the possibility that the hospice will raise funds to buy the land from the landowner, or depending on viability, there is always that possibility that the landowner may be in a position to gift the land, but that's really all part of the ongoing discussions. But certainly, I think for the purposes of the plan making, the landowners are in support that this land will come forward for hospice expansion. In
terms of the reason then, why the two elements of this, you got residential, we'll call them halves. I know they're not quite half. The hospice half and the residential half. Why are they linked together under the same PE4 allocation then, rather than saying housing allocation and then this sort of separate hospice allocation? I think it came about really from wanting to actually ensure that the land was made available for the hospice. But we can, if you want us to consider whether it's appropriate to have them as two separate allocations, we can look again at that. And so just in terms of that, you said that you wanted to make sure that, what do you mean? What were you envisaging? Were you envisaging a planning application having to sort of demonstrate a red line around both parts of the land and sort of some mechanism, be it conditions, legal agreements, phasing, etc., to somehow sort of tie these two together? Yeah, I don't think we necessarily expected it to come forward as a single comprehensive scheme, but it was more about ensuring that the land was handed over to the hospice. I do know that the owners are in discussions they've been having. They have indicated that they may well find a developer who would actually come forward and develop it as a comprehensive scheme. Yeah, and actually the legal mechanism, and I know you had I think you had a question about it, is criterion 8 of the policy. I think where we're heading with this site is that it sounds like the two land uses and proposals are separate entities, really, because from what I'm hearing, there's no suggestion from the council that the residential development would have to facilitate the provision of the hospice expansion, and presumably the residential element, land could be sold, a local developer comes along, 25 dwellings, plan application comes in, and the other land would be completely separate. Presumably it wouldn't even form part of the planning application, and then it equally is sort of suggesting that the hospice are already sort of pursuing their own avenues on that parcel. So I wonder whether actually, in terms of the effectiveness of the policy, it does become two allocations, a standalone residential site, and then this sort of separate hospice expansion. If there's no link between the two, and there's not going to be a mechanism to link them in any way, shape or form, and they're physically separate and separate in their land uses, I just wonder whether the plan would be more effective or effective in actually separating the two out. I'm not sure what your views are on that.
In the absence of a functional link between the two, it does seem sensible to separate them. I think we ought to give consideration to that, and therefore redraw the boundaries as well between them. Yeah,
I think what you need to do is we'll hear some comments from other participants on this who've maybe commented on this. I think what the council needs to do is produce a sort of note, if you like, a sort of briefing note on this issue, on this allocation, and just set out and bring this all together as part of a justification to say, this is what the submitted plan did. In our view, we think that isn't sound, and we think that there are exceptional circumstances here to actually release this site from the green belt. Presumably, in doing that, are you acknowledging then that it's not so much safeguarded, but actually allocated for?
Yes, allocated, definitely.
Yeah. So I think you should bring it all together and sort of submit a note to the examination that just explains why you consider the submitted plan unsound, why you consider modifications are needed. In doing that, have a think about whether there should be two separate allocations, and why you think the exceptional circumstances exist to why you think it's necessary to amend the greenbelt boundary in order to ensure this is delivered. And yes, it wouldn't be, top of my head, it wouldn't be any forms of appropriate development, would it? So it'd have to come out of the greenbelt in order to support.
Yes, it would. Yeah.
This type of development.
Yeah. So we'll provide that note as soon as we can during the break.
Okay, any comments or observations from participants from just what we've heard about? A couple of issues there about obviously the site boundary for the residential element, but then also this issue of the hospice expansion and council seeking support to modify the plan to make this certain or more certain. Mr. Hall.
Yes, sir. I didn't want our comments and replies to your questions about the green belt allocation to be misunderstood. We are not either really against or for it remaining in green belt, but we are very much for the hospice being able to expand. It provides a good service in the area. So we were trying to be protective of the hospice expansion when we made our comments that we were against it being removed from the green belt, but we wouldn't be we wouldn't pursue that under the new if you're going to reallocate.
Okay, thank you. One of the other constraints, we talked about the Green Belt, we talked about the Aomb. One of the other constraints that I asked about in the matters, issues and questions, and this takes us on to, I think, question 28, was about heritage assets and the adjacent farmhouse and associated buildings. Is the farmhouse grade 2 star listed, I think? Is that right?
We have a number of heritage, so yes, so that it's Downingbury Farmhouse, which is grade 2 listed, and then other buildings are grade 2, and then we have the historic farmstead itself.
So in terms of that, then obviously at present, the extensive built development of Pembury, I think, is it Elmhurst Avenue, and the hospice, they obviously form the extensive built development. And I know that there's a few houses that continue beyond Maidstone Road, but then the farmhouse is still sort of set within, it's still got agriculture uses around it. It's still got the fields around it. And take the council's point that its setting has changed with the bypass and residential development, but it does still sit within this sort of immediate agricultural context. If you build essentially either side of it, which is what's proposed by the plan, so residential development would, in the P4 allocation to the west, would also be new housing. And then we talked about the hospice expansion, which would be presumably additional built development, buildings, car parking, etc. They would essentially go either side of the farmhouse complex of agricultural buildings. Do you think that relationship then between the farmhouse and the buildings and its agricultural setting, do you think that would be harmed by both of these allocations?
We have obviously considered the heritage assets throughout the plan making process, and in the decision to allocate the site. We have had extensive discussions with the council specialist conservation and urban design officer, and we do feel it is actually possible to develop the site in an appropriate manner, that there would not be significant harm to the heritage assets. And we have picked it up in the policy wording itself. So we have criterion 3, which talks about the layout and design to take account of the impact on the heritage assets, and that picks up on the listed building and the historic farmstead. And obviously I do think there is scope there for it, really the form of the development. We have the historic farmsteads guidance that can inform that as well.
So just talk to me in a bit more detail about how this would be achieved. And obviously I recognise there's no detailed design before us. But how could, obviously, the hospice, car parking, built development, buildings, etc., and approximately 25 dwellings, how would you envisage they could be developed in a way which wouldn't be harmful to the sort of intrinsic setting of this building, this agricultural setting of this complex?
Yeah, firstly, it's important to note that the buildings sort of front land primarily to the east, which is the main approach to the farm, and the farm is connected with land actually on the other side of the Maidstone Road as well. So it has it's on a piece of high ground that looks out that way, and that land then falls away to the east. There is also an existing strong boundary between the collection of heritage assets and the area proposed for the housing development to the west. And whilst we don't show a buffer there, that's because obviously, not obviously, but it's because there is scope there within the design itself to set both a respectful distance, a respectful form, and distribution and layout of development and massing of development that can minimise the effect on the landscape setting of those assets in that way. So we wouldn't be looking for very large forms, for instance, or tall forms, and they wouldn't be massed against that boundary to the farm complex. And then similarly for the hospice land, as we said, there's no detailed requirement, but clearly there's need for a very sensitive approach to the northern parts of that parcel, particularly with regard to views from the road to the east towards the farm buildings, and a setback from the actual access track that takes you into the group of farm buildings. So there's a number of ways which the development can respond to the site context to minimise the effect on the heritage assets. And at 221 of our statement, we do acknowledge that some harm could be caused to this part of the significance because of the development of the site. But that it also needs to take account of the context of the site, as you pointed out, the roads network and the existing areas of development.
So is council's position then that would sort of fall within potentially, obviously you don't have the final design before you, but likelihood that it's going to be within sort of less than substantial harm?
Very much so, sir. And the heritage statements and design and access statements for these developments would address these matters. Within
the note that I've just asked for, could I ask the council to pick that up? Obviously, you've talked there in a bit more detail about the context of the farm. It's sort of eastward facing, associated with the land beyond Maidstone Road, etc., etc. Could I ask you to pick that up in that note as well?
Of course, sir.
Any representations? Anything people want to raise on that one? Points there. Yeah, Parish Council.
Hi, yes, thank you. No, I was just going to also make the point that as part of the neighbourhood plan work that's been ongoing for Pembury, there is an aspiration that we have a policy to deliver about improving walking and cycling and horse riding facilities and accessibility throughout the village. And there is potential there, I think, to build into that policy, certainly for the residential part of the site, the ability to cut from footpath WT 218, which runs along the southern edge of the site, up to footpath WT 231 to the northwest. And there is a small bridleway link there at WT 411, which has been identified by local residents as a bit of an issue. So I wonder if there's scope to utilise the development that's happening on that site to increase the permeability across those paths, and particularly the access of that bridleway. Thank you.
Sir, the allocation does actually show the potential pedestrian link to the northwest. The existing footpath which runs along the southern part of the site, which is WT 218, it comes from and through Penary Farm, across the southern part of the site, and joins the access road to the development. So that would have to be respected. There would have to be permeability through the site to connect these two routes, which actually would be a benefit. I suppose there's nothing, and obviously the application would have to take account of other policies which talk about improving walking and cycling provision. But I suppose there's nothing to prevent a further criteria in this policy to make sure that those footpath connections are improved in the vicinity of the site, and those that exist are respected and connected to.
Yeah, I agree. I'd support that as a main modification. You show the pedestrian links on map 67 anyway, so it would make sense that there'd be just an additional policy requirement in there that which refers to promoting accessibility in that regard. So yeah, I don't see an issue with that.
Thank you.
Anything else on PE4 or the hospice elements of it then? No. Just in terms of if the council, if you did seek to split the two, there's obviously an area of landscaping sort of in between. There's a sort of a wooded area there, I believe, that separates the two. So again, leave that with you as to where that falls and how that would be considered, because I think obviously at the minute it's shown within the wider allocation, but if you did think it would be appropriate for effectiveness to split these two, then how you sort of take that into account, which side does it fall into? Does it just become left as existing, or what's proposed really?
Yeah, that area is, oh sorry, am I on?
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, that area provides the footpath link, sir. Just to go back to my footpath plan, WT218, which comes from Downingbury Farm. It comes down the edge of that woodland on the east side, passes through it into the southern part of the allocation site. So we'll give consideration to that to see to make sure that that's appropriately dealt with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on, and what we'll look at PE5 next, and we'll consider we'll break for lunch. I know there's some more detailed representations about some of the remaining sites, but land at Sturgeons, I think it is PE5, Henwood Green Road. So what's the position here? I think there's reference to a planning permission on the site, is that right?
That's right. So there was a planning application granted in 2019 for 19 dwellings on the site, and in the council's response to question 29 rather, we provide an update on that and confirm that building work has started on site and is now substantially complete. As part of our reviewing the sites generally in the plan, we've considered the need or not to continue to allocate the site in the plan, and for that we had sort of particular rules that we used to make that decision. And in this instance, due to the base date we were using, at that time, the site had been cleared at that time, so it was considered appropriate then to continue to allocate it.
So in terms of the planning permission then, so what's happening on sites at the moment then?
Buildings are being constructed. So I recently visited the site just before obviously submitting the hearing statement, and there were a number of buildings in progress at that time, so up to sort of second floor level.
Okay, we talked about this for the sites, isn't it? Is whether or not allocations become unsound, and there's a sort of tipping point, and it sounds like because it's under construction, it's probably it's not unsound. It's not a completed development. In terms of the site boundary for this one, then is that based on entirely the approved scheme?
It is, sir, and we have touched at question 30, which was your question about amending the green belt boundary. We have set forward in the response that there is a slight error on the current Pembury map, which is showing the northeast corner of the site. So let me just set the context. Sorry, the site is largely outside of the green belt, with just a small area in that northeast corner being greenbelt, and that forms the residential curtilages of the permitted plots 18 and 19. So the greenbelt work had indicated a very low harm from releasing that part of the site from the greenbelt. So the intention is to take that small area of the site, which is now residential curtilage, out of the greenbelt. And the greenbelt boundary there would follow the existing. You'll see there's an outshot to that northeast part of the site, and the greenbelt boundary would follow the hedgerow there. So it's basically been informed by that, the existing planning permission under construction.
So when you say there's an error, then where's the error occur?
It's an error on the Pembury map.
On the
so it
internet.
just needs correcting. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so you've got map 68 in the local plan, which is site layout plan, that shows obviously access as permitted.
Yes.
So on the Pembury inset map, then let me just bring that up.
So on the inset map, you'll see P5 in orange, and then you'll see a little green line going across the site. So that needs removing. And then you can see there how the limit to built development in red wraps around, the site on that northern side.
Okay, so as per the submission policies map, then that little green bit was still shown as within.
Yes, because that is the existing greenbelt boundary. It just hasn't been removed from the revised maps.
And I think you mentioned some plots there. So what's actually proposed as part of that? I'm just thinking as what the exceptional circumstances would be to amend it if those plots are there. What part of the site is that? Is it saying so it's Muttley Gardens or something?
It is, yes. And Mr. Scully is going to talk further on that point.
So because it's I think it's Para 149F and the amending the boundary to a defensible, strong, clear feature that is felt appropriate to follow that site boundary rather than potentially what might be an area of garden, indeterminate area of garden as it is at the moment. Just for background, the area prior to the application, and or whether it's still there now or whether that bit part has been constructed, was actually like a builder's yard. It was hard surfaced, and that boundary has been in place for some time. And so it is following a very strong established long-term boundary.
Okay, so in terms of necessary modifications, then this is where we're getting to policies map. So the plan itself is the sort of the submission local plan is correct, but the policies map is wrong. Is that right?
That's right. I'm just checking the supporting text, but I'm sure that's correct when I've looked at it before. Yes, that's right. So the plan is correct. It's the Pembury map that's got the error.
Does the plan talk about removing it from the green belt? I think
what you're looking for, I think, in the local plan is page 69, and the table of greenbelt removals, which is 4.129, table 6, greenbelt sites, and P5 is listed in there, showing to be removed 0.049 hectares.
And it's also referenced in the supporting text to the policy on page 288, paragraph number 5.705.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so this falls into the category of there would be no from the. I'll go back and double check the plan, but it doesn't look like there'd be any main modifications to the plan. So I can't recommend main modifications to directly to a policies map. So what I propose to do with this is, when you come to consultation on main modifications, so what you'll have, and I think I explained this on the first day, is you'll have your schedule of main modifications, which show all the modifications to the plan. What I then generally advise councils do is have a separate schedule of additional modifications or minor modifications, and they are all your typos and minor things that don't materially change anything. So yeah, typos or reference numbers that are incorrect. Then you have a separate document that shows all the changes to the policies map. So let's, for example, the easiest one is a site. So let's say, for example, PE5, hypothetical situation. I said you need to delete PE5. There'd be a main modification to the plan, which would delete PE5. And then alongside that, you'd have a document listing all the changes to the policies map. And that's where it would sort of show the before and after. So normally, changes to the policies map are linked to a main modification because they are doing something that's linked to a modification to the plan. This falls into the category of there's no main modification to the plan, but the council, upon adoption of the plan, would need to change the map because there's an error. So have a separate schedule of your main modifications, your additional modifications, and then a separate document showing all the policy map changes. And so this one would fall in that, and you would consult on that. So obviously, clearly you consult on your main modifications, and at consultation, you would also be consulting on proposed mapping changes, and that's where this would fall, because unless there's anything to tie it to in the local plan, there would be no main modification to the plan. It would just be a mapping change.
That's understood. Thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Gilbert?
I was just going to add, sir, that there is already a document like that on the core document list, which could be updated, and that's core document 3.129U or O, U. Thank you.
Yeah. And generally with what I would say is with additional or minor modifications, I can only recommend main modifications. So that's something that sort of sits outside of the examination process. And what I typically say to councils, and some inspectors do this differently, but what I typically say to councils is, you're consulting on the main modifications, you're consulting on the proposed changes to the policies map. What I generally advise councils to do as well is alongside that consultation, publish your schedule of additional or minor modifications, but just make it abundantly clear that you're not consulting on that. This is just a factual, here are the list of typos that we'll be changing, because that sits outside of the examination process, and that would just be changes that the council would make upon adoption of the plan. And like I said before, that really is just typos and errors, numerical errors, etc., where they maybe fall within supporting text or introductory paragraphs, things like that just aren't material to the actual plan. Any other comments on PE5 then? No. Okay, time's moved on. What I'm going to suggest, because we've got PE6 next, which is land at Woodsgate Corner. I don't think we'll probably get through this in 20 minutes that we've got until the lunch break. So what I'll do is I'll propose that we'll finish early for lunch, and we'll have an extended lunch break, if that's okay with everybody. Have a slightly longer lunch break, and we'll adjourn. And unless there's any strong objections to a slightly longer lunch break, then we'll adjourn now, and then we'll resume back at 2 o'clock. Charlotte, just whilst you're here, this afternoon's session, there is a separate link, although I think everybody is here. Do you want us to log out and leave this session and then rejoin this afternoon? What's best to do?
Yeah, you still need to do that, because the separate sessions is more for the streaming to YouTube, because it can't cope with too long a session. So people still need to do that. Yeah. Right.
Okay. So if everybody sort of leaves this meeting, logs out of this one, and then we'll have a slightly extended lunch break, and then we'll resume at 2 o'clock. And I think it's just the 3 sites to go through there. And then, so if everybody logs back in on that separate joining link for this afternoon's session in time for a 2 o'clock start, then please. Thank you.